Well, hello there, friends and family. In this video right here, and this is Monday, the 10th of February, it builds on two past videos. And what I mean by that, in my first video on this particular subject, it concerned the three patients that had been released from the hospital that were confirmed cases of the coronavirus. And the first that was released was in Everett, Washington. And they were released on February the 4th. However, they were released and they were still required to be isolated at their homes. They were still also required to be monitored by not only our Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which is a federal agency, but their state health, public health care officials. Then, on the 7th, we had two more released, and they were from Chicago, Illinois. And they were released under the same conditions. They had to remain isolated in their homes, and they also were going to be monitored by the federal agency, our Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as the Illinois Public Health Department. And that got me to thinking of why would they all of a sudden be released but still remain in isolation and still be monitored daily. And that's what, if you haven't watched that first video, the two articles that I refer to there said they'd be monitored daily. So if they were indeed recovered, then why was any of this necessary? Why was the isolation necessary? Why was the daily monitoring necessary? And I went through that in the first video, which I released on the 9th. And actually I had a lot of trouble getting that video out. It actually took 4 different attempts, after multiple attempts to edit it, to get the video up and uploaded to YouTube and for them to accept it. So if you haven't watched that video, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description below the video, I would suggest you do, in case you're just stumbling across this video and you don't really understand it and it's confusing. The second video I released happened yesterday, Sunday, on February 9th. And in relation to the first video, I said, you know, if these people were indeed recovered and were no longer infectious, why weren't they not showing up on two of the most popular websites, one of which they were, but the second most reputable, that being a website that's been built and maintained and updated by Johns Hopkins University, why aren't they shown as recovered? Well, then magically, yesterday afternoon, Sunday, on an update later in the afternoon, after I'd released the video, they showed up as being recovered. And that brought up the question is, well, first of all, as all of you all know, in the U.S., we don't have many federal agencies that work over the weekend, as well as our universities do not. And something I've been doing from the onset of this, I've been monitoring these websites multiple times daily, to include the weekends over the past few weeks. And never before did I see any updates on the Johns Hopkins website on a Sunday. They always came on Monday. But magically, since the release of that second video, these three people that I had questioned as to why they were released from the hospital but still remained in isolation at their homes and were still requiring daily monitoring by a federal agency and a state agency, but yet they were not listed as recovered. And then magically, like I said in that second video, which was my past video, they all of a sudden became listed as recovered. Now I have seen in the comments, well, you know, I stopped at 3 and I didn't look at 2 and 1. Well, that was not the case. I went through the list of recovered patients multiple times on Sunday, Saturday, Friday, prior to that, and they weren't showing up. They weren't showing up at all. So I'll discount that viewer comment. But what I'm about to share with you today confirms what I have thought for a couple of weeks now. And it all goes back to a case study that was done in Germany of a cluster of 5 patients. One was a Chinese businesswoman that actually traveled from Shanghai, China to do workshops in Munich, Germany at a German parts manufacturer for the automotive industry. And it was during this case study by German physicians and epidemiological experts that they discovered, and this has not been published by anyone else, that indeed you could be infected by the coronavirus while you were asymptomatic. In other words, a person that's out there that wasn't showing symptoms was able to infect you prior to the onset of symptoms, which was so much different from all the rest of the coronaviruses that are out there. SARS, MERS, as well as 4 other common coronaviruses that cause about 25% of all colds in the world. So that all being said, this was groundbreaking. This would make it very hard to contain and control this new novel coronavirus. But more so, they also showed that after the 3 of their confirmed cases, 3 businessmen, were still contagious, still had a high viral load, they were still shedding the virus after recovery. Meaning, they could still infect others even after they had recovered and were no longer showing symptoms. Now, the CDC stopped short here in the U.S. of saying anything about that. But they have confirmed and they have said that asymptomatic transmission of the coronavirus is most likely. Now, China has backed off from that, and they are recounting that the young woman that traveled from Shanghai, China, was actually had symptoms. And the Chinese government has recanted that based on this Chinese businesswoman from Shanghai recanting her statement initially and saying she was actually having minor symptoms prior to meeting with the German businessman. Of course, we all know she was probably put under pressure to make that statement. But here again, based on that I released that video, and then within hours, basically probably less than, I released the first video questioning why these 3 patients in the U.S. were released around 2:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. By 4:30 p.m. Sunday, the 3 magically showed up on the Johns Hopkins website as being recovered. To me, I thought that was rather strange. But then, I didn't let this whole issue of being infectious and contagious after recovery lay. And I kept digging, and I kept digging. Now, what I want to say about this is I was not able to come up with this article using the most preferred and widely used search engine in the world. And I'm not going to name it right now, but I think all of y'all know it. I had to go to other resources. And it's not that this article is covert or secret. It's just the fact that the amount of effort that I had to go through and the resource that I had to go to just to dig it out on the internet was extreme. So y'all, here we are. And this is an article that was published on the prevention website. And if you don't know about prevention, they were actually a magazine. I think they were started, about 60 years ago. And after doing literally dozens upon dozens of searches to try to answer the question, were recovered patients that were released from the hospital here in the U.S. still infectious, never could find any information on it. So I switched gears and went over to what's preferably known as the dark side of the web, and it's a place you just don't want to step on into unless you've got, you know, proper safeguards in place, and even then you just never know. But I went ahead and did it anyway, done it before. So it came up with this, and this just proves the amount of censorship being employed by certain internet platforms, we'll say at the least. And this one here relates back to that first patient that we had that was confirmed with coronavirus in the U.S. And that patient was, of course, in Washington State. And he'd been being treated at the Everett Providence Medical Center. I think it's north of Seattle. And what this says here is, how is coronavirus treated? First U.S. patient has been released from the hospital. 35-year-old Washington man says he is home, continuing to get better. Now, you know, if you focus on that, he's at home continuing to get better. Really don't know what that means. But what this article goes through is just how he was treated. But that's not what's so important. If you remember back on my video when I raised the question that yes, they released this young man on February the 4th, but he was released conditionally. And his conditions were, of course, that he would remain in isolation at home for some unknown period of time, and that he would continue to be monitored by not only our federal Center for Disease Control and Prevention, but Washington State health officials as well. Here again, for some length of time, no one knows. And I thought that was strange. If indeed he was okay, not infectious or whatever, you would think he'd go along with his normal life. So I'm not going to read down through all of this, because it just goes through a lot of information we already know. I mean, at the time this article was published on the 5th of February, there was only 11 confirmed cases of the novel coronavirus in the U.S. There's now 13. So it's a lot of old information. But what I want to show you is down here at the bottom of this article. And I'll link this article in the video description below in case some of you would like to read through the entire article. And I would suggest you would. So, down here it says, what does recovery look like after coronavirus treatment? People with coronavirus don't necessarily have a long recovery period, Dr. Adalja says. However, health officials are still encouraging a period of home isolation after someone has the novel coronavirus as a precaution. It hasn't been, and this is the part that I want y'all to focus in on, it hasn't been established how long someone might be contagious after they have 2019 nCoV, Dr. Adalja explains. And if you'll remember in my past videos, that's exactly the question I brought up. Were indeed they still infectious? And was that why they were still being quarantined in their homes, you know, in isolation? Is that was the reason why they were still being monitored? Well, here you have it. The day after this young man was released to his home and would remain isolated in his home as a condition of his release from the hospital, here's Dr. Adalja explaining it. It hasn't been established how long someone might be contagious after they have the 2019 nCoV virus. And if you remember from the past videos, we also looked at 2 other patients that were released from the Chicago hospital in Chicago, Illinois. They were released, and it was a older couple, I think they were in their 60s, husband and wife, and they were released under the same conditions. They'd be released to their home, and there they would remain for some period of time in isolation and be monitored daily by our federal CDC and the Illinois State Health Department. So in this one sentence right here, and that's what you got to understand about the truth out there, folks. Sometimes if you dig deep enough, you listen, you read, the truth's there. Maybe if only for a second or two, something slips out. Just like this here. It hasn't been established. How long someone might be contagious after they have the 2019 nCoV virus. Now think about that. It doesn't say they aren't contagious. What it's saying is we don't know how long after they've had it they will be contagious. And that's what I said in my previous video back on the 9th. We just don't know. And this is the one fact right here that makes it extremely troubling to those of us out there yet, especially those of us in the groups listed that are more apt to not only get the virus, but die from the virus. This is very troubling, because this gets back to the question of how long, if the virus erupts in your area or close by you, and you do self-isolate to prevent your own infection, how long can you go? Well, it's no longer, once the infection spreads into your state, city, neighborhood, 14 days after the last reported case. But now you got to wonder, how long after these people get over it? Are they still out there in their homes? Hopefully they're being isolated in their homes after they recover, that they are still infectious. And what we're going to be looking at, and you'll know I talked about this in that previous video as well, that there were only a few scenarios that are possible if indeed this turned out to be the case. And now what we're seeing from Dr. Adalja, it appears it is the case. They're still infectious after they recover. They still have an active virus. They still have a viral loading that's extremely high. They're still shedding the virus. They're still infectious. And that was, proved out, as I stated in that past video too, by a German case study that was performed in Munich, Germany on a cluster of 5. One was a Chinese businesswoman, and then there was 4 German businessmen. And if you haven't watched that video as well, you might want to. And start from there and progress watching the videos up until this one, because it lays out what we're talking about here right now. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at just who Dr. Adalja is, so you can understand his credibility. So here we are at statnews.com, and they put out an article they published on February the 4th, 2020. And this will give you some information on Dr. Adalja that we mentioned in the prevention article. But here again, this is talking about something I have mentioned before. Experts envision 2 scenarios if the new coronavirus isn't contained. So we're going to go down here and briefly read through it. It's not all that long. With the new coronavirus spreading from person to person, possibly including people without symptoms, reaching 4 continents and traveling faster than SARS, driving it out of existence, is looking increasingly unlikely. It's still possible that quarantines and travel bans will first halt the outbreak and then eradicate the microbe, and the world will never see the 2019 nCoV again, as epidemiologist Dr. Mike Ryan, head of the health emergencies at the World Health Organization, told STAT on Saturday. That's what happened with SARS in 2003, and that's exactly what happened. SARS just basically fizzled out when it hit summertime back in 2003. It started in 2002 in November, and by July 2003, it was pretty much done. Many experts, however, view the happy outcome as increasingly unlikely. Independent, self-sustaining outbreaks of the 2019 nCoV in major cities globally could become inevitable because of substantial exportation of pre-symptomatic cases. Scientists at the University of Hong Kong concluded in a paper published in The Lancet last week. So here again, just in this article, within 3 paragraphs, they're sort of taking a reversal. Now they're back saying that pre-symptomatic, which is what we call asymptomatic. Therefore, they're worried about it being contagious prior to the onset of symptoms. So, researchers are therefore asking what seems like a defeatist question, but whose answer has huge implications for public policy. What would a world with an endemic 2019 nCoV circulating permanently in the human population be like? Right there, folks, is what I told you 2 videos ago, was one of 2 scenarios. First being that we don't contain it, there is no cure, and it becomes infectious throughout the population, and the only way being that it would stop would be to infect every last single person on the planet. Scenario 2 would be if indeed somehow they come up with a cure, which unfortunately for many of y'all who don't like this word, that would be a vaccine. I guess at that point in time you have to make a decision what you will do personally, and I'm not going to step off all into that controversy. And it continues, it's not too soon to talk about this, said Dr. Amish Al-Dawja. Now remember, he was the doctor that said in the prevention article that we just didn't know how long after the patient recovers would they still be carrying the virus and be infectious. And who is Dr. Amish Al-Dawja? An infectious disease specialist at Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Now, Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security is sort of a quite unique unit within Johns Hopkins University and Medical Center. But I'll switch to that once we read through the remainder of this article. We know that respiratory viruses are especially difficult to control, so I think it's very possible that the current outbreak ends with the virus becoming endemic. And endemic means across the entire planet. Experts see 2 possibilities, each with unique consequences. And the first is just another coronavirus. 2019 nCoV joins the 4 coronaviruses now circulating people. You know, like we discussed before, there are 4 out there, along also with a 5th, that's SARS, 6th, that's MERS. And the first 4 that they discovered are basically responsible for 25% of the common colds. So here he continues, I can imagine a scenario where this becomes a 5th endemic human coronavirus. See, the first 4 are endemic. Said Stephen Morse of Columbia University at Melbourne School of Public Health, an epidemiologist and expert on emergent infectious diseases. We don't pay much attention to them because they're so mundane, especially compared to the seasonal flu. Although little is known outside of healthcare and virology circles, the current 4 are already a part of the winter-spring seasonal landscape of respiratory disease, Al-Dawja said. And then he goes in here to name them. 2 of them are OC43 and 229E, and they were discovered back in the 60s, but had circulated in cows and bats, respectively, for centuries. The others are HKU1 and NL63 were discovered after the 2003-2004 SARS outbreak, also after circulating in animals. It's not known how long they existed in people before scientists noticed, but since they jumped from animals to people before the era of virology, it isn't known whether that initial jump triggered the widespread disease. And you see here, what they say, OC43 and 229E are more prevalent than other endemic human coronaviruses, especially in children and the elderly. Together, the four are responsible for an estimated 1/4 of all colds, like I've been telling you. For the most part, they cause common cold-type symptoms, said Richard Webby, an influenza expert at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Now remember, it is most likely in scenario if this thing becomes entrenched. But all through this, saying it becomes entrenched, and what that means, it's going to be like the flu. You know, the flu subsides in once things start to warm up in the latter part of spring through summer, early part of fall, and then somewhere, depending on your weather, whether that be end of September, early into October, the flu season starts, well, especially here in the U.S. And then it progresses, peaks out somewhere during January and February, starts trailing off, here again, depending on where you live and your climate, between anywhere from end of March till end of May. That's what they're saying. This could be like that. What they aren't saying is, well, people will be dying from it every year. And there'll be no way, folks, that you will be able to self-isolate every year. There's just no way. Which gets back to my first scenario is, everybody will eventually catch it, and those who will survive will survive. Those who die will die until, in fact, indeed, the entire population of the planet carries the novel coronavirus. So, and they go on to talk more about it. But the reason I brought up the article was just to show you who Dr. Aldalja was, Amish Aldalja, and who he's with. John Hopkins there, and we all know them really well. So now I'd like to talk about their second scenario that they think it'll be, and that's the 2019 nCoV returns repeatedly like a bad seasonal flu. That pretty much sounds like their first scenario, doesn't it? It's becoming endemic. The seasonal reflects the fact that viruses can't tolerate, and this is the important part I want you to know about. There is some hope here that there'll be a decline in the 2019 nCoV virus here as we start to go into the warmer months. And that's what he's saying right here. The seasonal reflects the fact that viruses can't tolerate high heat and humidity. They prefer the cool, dry conditions of winter and spring. That sort of explains why we have a cold and flu season. Both the cold, their viruses, influenza's viruses, coronaviruses, or of course viruses, all viruses have one thing in common. They don't tolerate heat well or high humidity conditions. And even though they don't, like with the flu, they don't totally disappear, the numbers of viruses available out there in the environment to infect you and others becomes increasingly less as the temperature rises. Just some information there, and you can look that up. It's easy enough to do. You can even use their Giggle search engine, as I call them. So, and that's what he says here. That's why the flu, as well as the four coronaviruses, are less prevalent in warm, humid months. If the new coronavirus follows suit, then containment efforts plus the arrival of summer should drive the infection to near zero. Now, there's something I'd like to say about that. You can still contract a cold and the flu, as most of you well know, during the warmer months. It is rather rare than during the winter, but it does happen. And a lot of people say that, well, I must have got, summer cold. But like he says here, but also like flu viruses, that doesn't mean it's gone. The bad reflects the fact that the number of 2019 nCoV cases and deaths so far suggests that the new coronavirus has a fatality rate around 2%. That's almost certainly an overestimate. Of course, nobody knows that, since the mild cases aren't being counted. But even 2% is less than the SARS, we all know now, was 10%, and nowhere near the 37% of MERS. On the other hand, seasonal flu kills fewer than 0.1%. That's 1/10 of 1% of those it infects. So that's still tens of thousands of deaths a year just in the U.S. The global disaster that was the 1917 Spanish flu, which went from 1917 to 1918, pandemic killed 2.5%, though some estimates exceed 10%. So, that gives you an idea of what they're talking about here. And these are the experts. This is not me, Mr. Tom, just a little old country engineer out here in Alabama. And here on the 5th, or actually this was published on the 4th, same day as that patient was released from the Everett, Washington Providence Medical Center, that they're already discussing that it's just going to be a reoccurring thing every year when we go into the late fall, winter months, and early spring. And from everything we've seen so far, people, I don't see how that's going to be a good thing, facing not only influenza like we have, which here in the U.S. has been extremely bad the last 2 years. In fact, last year it was considered an epidemic. This year, it's just slightly, I think, like 1/10 of a point below being epidemic. Now, add on the 2019 novel coronavirus every year, you're starting to get to see my concern, aren't you? Especially for those of us who are male, and those of us who are ages 54 and older, and understand the older you are, a lot more likely you will die once you contract the 2019 nCoV virus. Then, should you have, like me, any underlying health problems, they call out diabetes, they call out hypertension, high blood pressure, they call out cardiac problems as being the three most thought of as cause major complications that result in death. But let's say you're like me and you're male, you're 64, about to be, and you have complications. I have high blood pressure. I also have COPD, which has also been a factor that they've included in there as being what adds to the mortality rate. So I have 3. It ain't looking too good for me in the years to come, if indeed this is the case. Now, I'll let you take a look at your own health circumstances. I don't know all of y'all's, but I do know some of them. And for many of y'all share similar problems as I do. And this makes something to try to avoid every year extremely troublesome, I would think. So, y'all, in my mind, I think I've answered the question that I put forth when these 3 patients were released from the hospital here in the U.S., but had to remain isolated at their homes and still receive daily monitoring from federal CDC and their corresponding state health officials. And that is the fact that right now it is indeed infectious for some period of time after you recover. I've also shown you that, there's a couple of possible scenarios here, neither of which looks real bright and promising for humanity as a whole, especially so if you are a male, elderly, and have underlying health conditions. But something that came out yesterday afternoon, and that's why we're sitting here taking a look at Dr. John Campbell's YouTube channel, which I follow Dr. John Campbell and have for quite some time. He does an excellent job in explaining and going through things concerning coronavirus as well as many other subjects. But what he came out with a video yesterday evening on February 10th was that based on research and data that is coming out of China, that there's now the thought that novel coronavirus 2019 is actually capable. It's become an aerosol contaminant or contagion. And what that means is it's spread through the air, and not only by droplets based on people coughing and sneezing, but it becomes airborne. And if indeed that is true, and I'll just refer you, and I'll link his video right here so you can listen to it. Like I say, he goes through it better than I can probably stumble through it. If indeed this new 2019 novel coronavirus is airborne, it just don't get no worse than that, folks. And this all gets back to a video I did near the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak that asked the question, was this indeed a accidental or intentional release from the Wuhan Institute of Virology there in the center of Wuhan, which has level 4 labs which are capable of containing and performing research on some of the most deadliest viruses known to man. And it was reported in 2017 and again in 2019 that it was suspected, and our State Department thought proven, that they were involved in bioweapons research. In other words, they were researching viruses not only to be used in commercial applications as far as prevention, but parallel they were looking at their uses in China's bioweapon program. Now, there's no way to prove that, and a lot of people have poo-pooed on that idea, and, well, you know, cross species from bats. And here again, the fact that it started in bats, I just don't see how they can correlate to that. The fact that it wasn't a accidental or intentional release from that lab, and it wasn't either being manipulated at the time of release or modified to potentially become a bioweapon. I just don't see how they can make that conclusion, but maybe that's out of not wanting to spread that fear and panic. I'll leave that to you. The only thing I'm going to say about this is, if indeed this has become an airborne virus, it doesn't get any worse than that, and that's exactly what Dr. John Campbell says right here in his video. I hope you'll watch it. I'll leave a link in the video description below. I'll also leave another link, and that's to a website right here, NewsGP. And it says right here, claims coronavirus can spread through the air. A senior Chinese official has said the virus can infect people via airborne transmission. But an Australian expert says more evidence is needed. According to a report in the local news site, China Daily, the deputy head of the Shanghai Civil Affairs Bureau, Xing Qian, revealed a potentially troubling development over the weekend at a media briefing concerning government efforts to contain the virus spread. Mr. Qian said transmission routes of the coronavirus included direct transmission, contract transmission, and aerosol transmission. Aerosol transmission refers to the mixing of the virus with droplets in the air to form aerosols, which causes infection after inhalation, according to medical experts, he said. We have called on the public to raise their awareness of prevention and control of the disease caused by family gatherings. And then it just goes on to explain all of this. But if indeed this is the case, it just don't get a whole lot more worse than this. And I'll leave it at that. This video is getting long anyways. It's rather depressing, and nothing I've had to say tonight has been good news. Other than the fact that there is a good chance that as soon as temperatures start to rise and we start getting the sunshine coming out again, this novel coronavirus could start tapering off to the point where it's no longer a threat during our late spring, summer, and early fall months, and then we'll just have seen it come fall 2020 if it returns. With all that said, like I said, I've talked enough tonight. I hope this video does find y'all well, And I want you to take care of yourselves out there. Stay focused on your preparations and stay safe, you and your families. And by all means, may God bless each and every one of you. And until I see you on the next video, folks, goodbye for now.